Okay, well, firstly, thank you for having me. I was just saying to Linda a little earlier, I wish we could be having this conversation in a week from now, because next week my work plan goes up to Cabinet, and so do my powers as Commissioner. And I can't really go into detail about those powers, but I can assure you that when these are announced next week, you'll be left in no doubt that we, collectively, will change the landscape of constructed buildings in New South Wales in the next couple of years dramatically. So if anyone is in any doubt whatsoever about that intent, I just wish I was able to take questions this time next week, but I'm sure Linda will arrange a further opportunity. But please make sure that you leave here today believing that what I haven't said is perhaps the more impactful piece, but let me move forward. Look, I'm not going to dwell on these other than to say these are my priority areas of work. I'm here to, first of all, build confidence. Now, that's not just some tokenism. The Premier wants, these slides will be available to everybody as well after here, but the Premier wants me to able to measurably demonstrate that the consumers are feeling more confident as I bring this transformation project to an advanced stage. So again, that won't be a puff piece, that'll be a significant piece of research that you people will be involved in helping me shape the work that we'll undertake in that space. Compliant buildings then sit front and centre of that piece. The buildings I have inspected in the last 14 weeks, and I've only been at this for 14 weeks, I have to tell you I've seen some of the worst buildings that I have ever seen in my entire construction career, which happens to be 50 years this year. You'll hear lots of talk about levers over legislation, and I'll spend a few minutes talking about that today. I want to move much more to an evidence-based platform for future policy and strategic decision making. I think we lack deep data, and without data it's really hard to make the right calls. So you'll see me very much focused on making sure that we have the data to do my work. So the things I'm going to touch on today are these. It's somehow not coming up on the screen here, so I'll have to turn around, but I want to talk briefly how we're going to work with you folk, because I see that I believe that we've got to build these bridges much more functionally than they've been, and I've noticed already a significant dysfunction across our respective responsibilities that we need to close down. I will address the role of certifiers, public and private, because I believe that private certifiers are part of the future. I don't see any way that we're going to return that back to council, but we need to make sure that we deliver a far better certification process, both public and private, than we have in the past. There are examples of both public and private certifier failure, so it's not about rock throwing, it's about looking at what are the issues that need to be attended to, and they will be. I'll take the rest of the questions at the end because I really want to move through this fairly quickly. When I first took on this role, I wasn't an applicant for this role. I understand there were 22 other applicants, but I got tapped on the shoulder for some reason, and I took on the role. I didn't even see it coming. I got that tap, and 2 weeks later I was into the job. But when I explained what I thought where we were up to was that this is a Gartner hype cycle. I don't know if anyone's seen a Gartner hype cycle, but that's what they use to measure the uptake of construction technology, where there's all this hype about what it can do, and then you sort of, everybody has a Bex and a good lie down, and suddenly works out, in fact, that it didn't do everything that it was always promised. Well, I think legislation over the last 20 years is a bit like that, and we're now at this trough of disillusionment. And so my role is simply this. I want to take the business case as usual, as in 2019, we'll have a new accreditation platform coming out and really standing up next year. We want to start to get the insurers back in the tent, and we can't get insurers back in the tent until such time as we've started to get some risk rating and some risk profiling of the players such that the insurers can see the good from the bad. And by 2025, we have to measurably demonstrate that the customers are feeling a lot more confident about this industry. Now, when I first took on this role, the first thing I was introduced to was the drafting of the bill, the Design and Building Practitioners Bill, which is currently sitting in the House at the moment. And it had its own momentum, so I really went along with that momentum. I think this is going to be the most significant tool that a building regulator will ever have, because it has two principal bookends in it. One is declared designs and the other is declared as-built drawings. Again, once we've got my work plan stood up, we'll have a further and detailed conversation about that. But what struck me most about the process was that the people who were drafting the legislation were living in that past thought bubble that basically said legislation is the game changer. Legislation is not the game changer. It's the levers around the legislation. It's how you pull every single possible lever to use legislation, but to do all of the other things that we need to do to actually make a difference. So understanding what risk management's about, understanding what the Insurance Council of Australia wants to start to come back into the game and underwrite buildings. Once you understand those metrics, then you understand what are the priority issues. My priority is to get the Insurance Council of Australia back into the game, and I want to start making sure that the current carve-outs in insurance are a thing of the past. We can't do that unless we rebuild the capabilities of the industry. So you'll see in my work plan that there is an absolute need to start at the bottom of the career pathways in our industry. I believe we've got to go right back into the vocational education space, and I've already well advanced into a collaboration agreement with New South Wales TAFE, and well, you'll hear more about that, but that project is well and truly underway. The next piece is to get the industry to understand that Australian standards are part of the kit that's the first bit of stuff they should put in their toolbox. It's the how-to. And it's not a piece of regulatory burden, it's in fact a tool. And I have yet to go onto a single site so far, since I've been in this role, where there's been an Australian standard present. Now that's pretty scary, because I've challenged some people on that as I've gone around. And they said, no, I've got one, I've had it for 20 years, it's sitting up on a shelf back in the office. And, you know, they're pouring concrete, they're laying bricks, and I'll show you some examples of what I've seen. It's my intention to stop those projects. So if I walk on a project coming up and they haven't got an Australian standard on the site, I will stop work. My new powers will allow me to do that, and we'll sit everybody down and we'll have a recital. We'll sit there and start reading them. And I'm not doing that for entertainment. I can assure you there are some very, very dishevelled builders at the moment who've already seen my first experience of dealing with them. We need to tidy up the standard forms of construction contract. We have totally bastardised standard forms of construction contracts over the last 30 years. And in fact, here we are 20 years into this century, and we're still using construction contracts that were written in the twilight of the last century. It's unbelievable that we still have self-facing construction contracts that actually have embedded in them the defences of an industrial revolution, not this digital revolution that we're going on through at the moment. So I've already commenced developing a standard form of lump sum building or build-only contract, and we'll talk more about that, but I can tell you that that will be a reality, and that will be on the table, and it'll be available for work about mid-next year. Because I believe there's a cohort of builders out there, particularly under 5 years old in their maturity, who should not be allowed to use anything other than a build-only contract, a fully documented project. I'm finding too many builders out there who are under 5 years old. They've got incomplete and inadequate documentation, and they're making it up. And making it up's not a way to build buildings that people can feel confident about. And then finally, we've got to do some work in the supply chain. So this slide's just simply to say it's not about the legislation, it's about all of the moving parts. Now, let's just deal with resources. I do not need a building commission. So everyone can bellyache about that for as long as they like, but I do not need a building commission. I see this challenge as being a major transformation piece. This is about taking what we've got, having a look at what needs to be done with it, and how to squeeze much more out of it than has ever been possible in the past. When people talk about bolting another organisation on to somebody or over somebody, they think in an analogue process. They think in the way that we used to think about designing responses to things in the past. We live in a new digital economy. The first thing we need to do is to have a look and see what are those tools and how can they be applied in a most and more impactful way than they ever have been in the past. So I'll have a team, what I would call my transformation management team. It'll probably cap at about 15 people, because I already inherit an organisation that's got about 270 people in it. The trouble with the way we've prioritised it in the past is that that's the typical point in the cycle of a project being completed, and in the 4 to 6 years after it's finished, that's where we put most of our effort. So it takes about 4 years to conceive and deliver a typical project, and then it takes about 6 years for it to reveal its problems. And we spend most of our time here trying to put our fingers in a dike on something that was long the horse has bolted. So basically I've lined the team up at Parramatta and said, guys, that's about 270 man-years of work per annum. Let's flip it. Let's do it that way. And come back and tell me what we could do if we actually created our priorities at the front end of the project rather than the back end, and how can we double the impact by 2023, and how can we double it again by 2025, measurably. And while we're doing that, let's start to think about the other things that we could be doing that would be beneficial to society. So one of the things could be that if we were to use this period of time to try and reduce the number of construction insolvencies in New South Wales, that would be something that would be quite useful to all of us. So one of the things that I'm saying to our team is that not only do I want you to be good at regulating electrical and plumbing and all those sorts of things, but I want to make sure all of your collective efforts all contribute to the headline issues, like some of these. So, for example, I think we have to work out how we can reduce waste on job sites by 40%. Now, waste is an actually telltale indicator. If you've got lots of waste as a result of the process that you've made in designing and organising a building, it's just simply a telltale to say room for improvement. And furthermore, we can't afford the amount of waste that we're currently producing as an industry. The global construction industry consumes about 40% of the world's natural resources every year. And we need to play our bit in starting to become far more effective. Now, these are not things perhaps that some of our customers have on their mind daily, but they're things that we need to think about. So here is the piece that's in my work plan strategy, and that basically says we're going to take the current state of what I call an analogue-facing industry in 2020, and we're going to work our way through a process that gets us to about 2022, and we'll throw every new, innovative, regulatory tool possible at this transformation, and at about 2022 we'll produce a discussion paper to say what should the regulator look like going forward. Up until then, what we've got is a massive cultural transformation piece, we've got a massive industry capability piece to work on before we need to do any more at that end. So we'll come up with what will the regulator look like going forward from about 2022, because I see my role essentially starting in 2020, 1st of January, as a transformation leadership role. It'll go for 3 years, and sometime towards the end of that they'll find another building commissioner who will then carry on from there. But I will lead the transformation piece, and I'm sure that when we're talking in a year from now, all of you will be supportive of what we're doing. I'll guarantee you that, and I'll make sure that, Linda, we hold that to account. So these are the sorts of things that we're going to be doing. At the moment, when our inspectors go out into the field, they all go out and look in their area of expertise, but we don't collect strategic information back to the centre. So by March next year, all of these people will have the ability to contribute to a single desk to say, when you're out on a job site, look at the plumbing, if you're the plumbing inspector. But when you're there, have a look around and see if the job site's chaos. Have a look and see if you think the safety's up to scratch. Have a look and see if you think the plans are and the way the job's being organised are up to scratch. Just make a couple of casual observations and feed it through to our data desk. Now you'll see that I've got a dotted line going through here, and fire and rescue, I've already started working on a MOU with fire and rescue such that we can actually get them to be part of feeding into that. There's a number of areas in planning that could contribute to this, and of course local government. So on the table will be, in the early new year, the opportunity to have a discussion with you folk about how you might contribute into that. Now the idea that I have is this, is that all of these people here should have at least 2 touch points on a project, on every single project that is being built in New South Wales. So this is like a big virtual arm. So one or so of these people should touch every project at least twice during its delivery, such that by 2023, 100% of projects get 2 touches. And one of the things that we'll be looking to do is that we have a very, very powerful data capability now. I can tell you, if any developer out there thinks that they don't have a digital twin stitched to their shoulder right here, right now, they're in for a shock. I am blown away by the digital power we have. So when we go down the list, we start with the DA, the developer, the ABN, the builder, the ABN, the certifier, the ABN, the financier, the source of fundings, and the insolvency history. I'm actually going to be developing a risk matrix that actually allows me to identify those players that are the most risky so that I can spend most of my time in their face. And you'll see that more clearly next week when my powers are announced. And so what we'll be doing is that we'll have a dashboard on my website, should be up and running by July next year. And basically what it'll do, it'll actually have a live population going into it. So all of the people who are feeding back in, and so it'll show progress towards achieving 100% of 2 visits per project by 2023. Then it'll have a look at targeted interventions and improvement and rectification and penalty notices. It'll track that by year. It'll track this new piece called the micro-learning pieces. These are the product of what we're doing with TAFE. They've undertaken in a collaboration for which we'll contribute money to start to build a platform of what are the missing urgent micro-learning pieces that we need, such that we can actually get those into the field and across all of the teaching institutions as quickly as possible. That's a work in progress, so I'll talk to you more about that next time we see. This is how my hand in all of this will go. Now remember, my powers, I don't need to be the line manager. Everybody who's a line manager is under my watch. I'm seeing all of these people fortnightly. They now have very clear milestones as to what we're going to be achieving in the next 2 and 3 years. And they're being led to the point that they need to demonstrate to me they're making the organisational changes to achieve these outcomes that I'm after. So I have strong oversight as of now of all of these people, and I have a medium or indirect oversight of all of these. So this is the landscape of people that I will have a regulatory relationship with. And in the first 3 months of next year, we'll put meat on that bone so that everybody understands what that means. Now, I've only got 6 pillars of work, so I don't have 23 recommendations or 144 recommendations. I've got a work plan. We're going to get the job done. So the work plan's simply got 6 pillars in it. The first bit is the implementation of the legislation and making sure that we've got a forward regulatory program that actually picks up on the missing pieces. You'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. The second piece is to build an industry-owned and operated rating system. A rating system that when it's stood up, it will be of great use to banks and insurers so that we can actually rate developers, builders, certifiers, consultants, manufacturers, RTOs. We will have a rating system, and we've prioritised the way that that will stand up, saying I want the rating system to be working for developers first, builders second, certifiers third, then we'll do the others progressively, such that by mid-2021 we have a very, very powerful industry-led ratings tool. Equifax is undertaken to provide the leadership in that space. Again, that's a lever, not a piece of legislation, but I'm in the process of discussions with the banks at the moment. I met with Anna Bligh 2 weeks ago and said, while I don't wish you to become the regulator, I think you have a big finger in the pie and you need to start taking notice because very shortly I'll have your undivided attention. So again, we'll have more to talk about that shortly. The third piece is the industry capability building piece. I see that as a centrepiece. Unless we start to rebuild the capabilities of this industry from the ground upwards, it's no good talking about the fact we don't have tradespeople, we don't have design professionals who can manage multidisciplinary design. It's no good talking about the fact that of the 1,500 strata plans that we make in New South Wales each year, that fewer than 50% of those buildings are made by a builder who's got any digital skills at all. So one of the challenges we'll have in lodging the as-built drawings, the declared as-built drawings, is that they'll be required to be lodged in a digital form because they'll be going into the e-construction platform. And as the Surveyor General said to me the other week, she said, Commissioner, you're going to have to get this industry to move beyond just simply marking up PDFs with a red pen because they're not going to be acceptable as the as-built drawings. So we've got a real capability challenge. We've got to get people to understand that you won't be able to be in this industry in this century if you just simply think you can continue to trade with the skills of the last century. Now, that's not what a regulator normally does, but I can tell you that's what we're doing. We are going to rebuild the capabilities, and you'll hear more about that as well. So the fourth piece of work is to clean up these construction contracts out there at the moment, which are neither use nor ornament to mankind. In fact, they're not intelligible at all to the Insurance Council. So when you have a lump sum building contract, like AS 2124 or 4000, whatever, and you think, well, you know, that was a contract that was designed with an intent to provide the mechanics for committing to a build-only contract. But over the years, every lawyer in town thinks that they can bolt 20 and 30 pages of extra conditions onto the end of that contract that actually takes what was a pretty sound idea around a build-only contract and turn it into a sort of half-pregnant design and construct contract. Well, the Insurance Council says, well, how do we work out where the design risk is in that mix? So we've got to put the risks back in the boxes where they belong. I met yesterday with a working group that is in fact committed to deliver me a draft form of a contract. It could be for residential projects. It'll be only for residential projects, Class 2. They'll have the draft of that available for me by March so that I can actually start looking at opportunities to apply it from the middle of next year. You'll see more about that, and you'll probably be involved in having an opportunity to comment on it. But I've made it clear to the builders who were in the meeting yesterday is that we'll either do this together or I'll do it on my own. It's going to get done. So I think there's an understanding that we're going to do that. The fifth leg of this plan is that we need to create a future-fit digital regulatory capability. At the moment, we have got so many places that you have to go to feed compliance reporting in that it is just a baker's muddle. The cost of responding to certification and all of the other regulatory inputs or feed-ins that we require are just out of control. When you make a list of them and you start to look at the fact that they're hard to see, they become opaque because there's so many of them, we need to leave this industry, at least by 2023, 25 at the latest, with a future-fit digital regulatory capability. We are going to build that in New South Wales. We will be the lead state in Australia to build that. And we have a very, very exciting project being designed at the moment. Again, you'll hear more about that, but I can assure you that we will have a very, very exciting future regulatory capability using digital tools like no other state has, and we're building this such that it has global potential. And the reason why it needs to have global potential is that in fact construction these days is drawn from all around the world. It's just simply not possible. You know, when people talk to me about, well, let's bring back the Clerk of Works. Well, maybe the Clerk of Works was fine when we made most of the construction on the job site, but we don't make most of the construction on the job site these days, and we're going to make less and less of it on the job site going forward because the simple cost of labour and the productivity of labour on construction sites is becoming so impossible that we'll have to find an alternative way of building smarter, and that opens up the gate to build better and to use new technologies and capabilities to observe all of that. And finally, a piece of work around looking at research to actually inform decision making. And so I'll give you an example of that now, I think. Look, that's what we're going to be doing over the next 6 months. We're on track. Everything here is pretty well on track. The only thing that's slipped a little bit is these case studies, and I'm going to talk to you about that right now. I'm setting up these working groups because what I want is for each of these pillars, we actually resolve what we want the outcome to look like in 2023 and 2025, and then we unpack that outcome back in 3 monthly achievements over that period of time, and my interest will be what's stopping us achieving each of those. Take no prisoners. I'm a project person, and that's the way we're going to run this, but we'll actually have all of those working groups stood up by the end of February, and some of you folk will probably be invited to be part of that. These are my legislative priorities going into 2020. My powers, getting the Design and Practitioners Bill through the system, the Building and Development Certifier Regulation stood up, in parallel with a Certifier's Practice Guide. That work was started some years ago and not completed. It will be finished by 1st of July, and we'll be starting to make sure that certifiers have a practice guide that makes it very clear what their roles are. and they'll learn that in a most dramatic way if they don't pay attention to it. I want to bring back the Building Product Safety Act that was done in 27 and re-put back into it what was taken out of it and take it forward again. We're going to be doing work on flammable cladding remediation. Again, I'm not going to announce that at this meeting. Next year is the 5-year review of the strata title scheme, and I believe that we really need to have a long, hard look at that. So I have engaged Brom & Weir to write some terms of reference for my contribution to that review, because I'm really concerned that we're building more and more very complex pieces of privately owned infrastructure, and we haven't really thought through what the management requirements and the duties of care that go with that. So we'll end up probably sometime by the end of 21 having a very clear situation of duty of care to make the drawings, a duty of care for the as-built drawings, and then looking at what is the duty of care functionality in the life of a building in the strata space, because I don't think that the communities in a strata are up for things like opal towers or any of those other sorts of complexities. So we'll need to come up with some thoughts on that, and again, you'll all be deeply involved in that. And what we'll then be doing is looking at what are the staging mechanisms that we have to actually make sure that people understand that these things are going to happen and when they're going to be in play by. So you'll also see a very resolved schedule of achievements that we plan to make in the coming 2 years. Everything we're going to do to implement these pieces of work now has a firm date against it. And as far as I'm concerned, they're removable dates. Project Shed. You're going to hear a lot more about Project Shed. This is the 20 case study projects that we're doing. We're going sometime in February through the end of March, we're going to walk on to 20 randomly selected sites between Wollongong and Newcastle, using my powers that will be available. We will requisition a schedule of all of the drawings that we use for tender, all of the engagement terms of the consultants on the project, the building contract, a register of all the drawings that were issued for construction, and the physical drawings of the date that we go in. So all of them will be at different stages, but I'm interested in looking at the physical drawings. So we'll have a list of the register of the tender drawings and the for construction drawings, and then the physical drawings on the date that we go in and take the data. We'll make a list of everybody on the project, we'll make a note of what work they're doing, and we'll have a look at what qualifications they have to do that work. We'll gather up a record of all of the certification and inspections, concrete, fire, everything that's been done. We want to see the complete history up to the day we walked on the site, and we'll call the certifiers in and interview them, and we'll make it clear what we'll be looking forward to going forward. We'll have a look at the progress payments from the client, and we'll have a look at the distribution of those payments to the supply chain. This will be the most deep dive, this will be the deepest dive that's ever been made into the construction industry that I know of, and I have had a look around the world to see what's been done. There have been some investigations into construction sites, but they've generally been by consent, with the larger companies agreeing to allow their projects to be put under the microscope. And of course, then when you get that consent, you have to be beholden to the niceties of saying, well, don't look there and don't look there. Look at these things. Well, that's not what we're looking for. I want to look at everything, and I don't want to even ask for, please, may I? My powers just simply say, I want it, and I want it really quick. Probably within a fortnight of us going in, I want all that stuff in my office. I've got a special group that will be tasked to pull all that together, and we'll take out of that insights into this industry that previously haven't been available. I'll show you just a couple of quick examples and then I'll take your questions. But this is going to be a very deep dive, and it's going to be a shock to some of the players, particularly some of the players who've made submissions to inquiries particularly those who see the world through their lens or through the interests of their members and not through anyone else's. People that are actually quite good at rock throwing, but won't be happy if the rocks start to come back. Now, I'm not in the business of rock throwing. I'm in the business of just simply saying, before you start chucking rocks, if you live in a glass house, you better have a think about it. Because some of the drawings I've seen on sites in the last month have actually frightened the designers. Do you know I've got the photographs over here, 2 projects. One of them's about 6 or 7 months into construction and the builder's using the 4 tender set. Can you believe that? Possibly you can. But in the bottom right-hand side of the drawing where you'd expect the people who drew the drawing to be present, against drawer, on the full set of drawings, it's got drawer. And against checker, it's got checker. And then I found on the next project it was issued for construction, but another architect, but still drawer and checker. Now I'm going to both of those practices in a very short while, and I'll be looking to have afternoon tea with drawer and checker. And then I'll be calling the managing director of those companies in and saying, I'll be back in 3 months and I'm going to come and have a look at every single drawing in your office. And if I find continuity of these practices, I'll stop your office. My powers will allow me to stop the production of drawings in your office. And I will bring the professional insurance industry down to your office. Because if they saw those practices going on, they would cancel your PI on the spot. And so they should. And if it means that 1 or 2 of these people go broke simply because they don't get it, well, we're going to have a few accidents along the way. I don't have any apologies for that. So we did 3 pilot inspections because I have this hypothesis that says everything that happens on the way to a job site has to go through the shed on the site, and then everything that happens from there on is a function of what happens in the shed. Basically, the conduct of a project occurs through the shed. So the first place I go to is, let's go to the site office. So on this first one, this is the first one randomly selected, that was the site office. Block of 12 apartments. The drawings looked as though he'd slept with them. No wonder they stored in that box, along with the first aid kit, the drills, his lunch, the jackhammers. Honestly, I've never seen such a pile of crap. He just finished a major pour, it had rained overnight. And I said, no curing compound on that slab, mate? What are you going to do? He said, I'll go up and hose it off every now and again. I said, well, if you're going to use water curing, then you're supposed to put hessian down and you're supposed to have soak hose up there. He said, yeah, I know. He said, but I don't agree with all that crap. And I said, so what do you think about this over here on your drawing where it says you can do it in accordance with the Australian standard? Oh, I said, have you got Australian standard on the site? No, I haven't. We had a pretty hot conversation, I can assure you. But then I said to him, mate, I'm an old bloke. I need to go and have a wee. Where's the toilet? He said, well, it's down the back. There's the toilet. We're 20 years into this century. Now, that's the toilet. And after I dusted the spiders off the seat, had a wee and I went back. And I said to him, mate, if you had a daughter working in the construction industry today, would you be happy to send her down to that toilet? And he looked at me and said, there's no women on this site. I said, well, have a look around you. I just came with the Safe Work team. And one of the members of the Safe Work team is a lady, a woman. Would you be happy to send her down to that? He said, no, I wouldn't. I said, well, you better clean that up because I'll be back. If I see it again, mate, I'll knock it over on the spot. This is just crap. The whole of the job, from top to bottom, was mayhem. He ended up with 5 or 6 rectification orders for safety. So then I went to the next job. That's where the checker and drawer drawings were. And I asked them about this wall. We were standing there, I was chatting to the foreman, he was telling me that he'd he's done a TAFE course, he's been a foreman, and he's been up, and now he's site manager. And we're standing there in front of this wall, and I said, mate, do you reckon you're saving much on the mortar? And I said, you know, the Australian standard probably requires the beds to be full. He said, it's only a wet wall. And I said, it'll be a bloody wet wall, that's for sure. But, you know, what was in it? You can't see it here on the slide, but yeah, just there, that's a wall tie in that. There's a wall tie just there. I said, mate, that bloody wall tie is not worth a pinch of shit. I'm sorry, but that's the only way I could describe it to him. And he said, And I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I said, I don't have my powers today, but I'll have my powers very shortly. I said, so here's a clue. When I come back, I know where that wall is, and I'm going to make you open the wall up. And if I find that there behind the wall, I'm going to pull down the next wall and the next wall. And if I pull down every bloody wall inside your building, look out, I'm coming. You might like to go and familiarise yourself with the Australian standard and what it says about brickwork. This was the most shocking of the projects that I saw in my random selection. This is a project that is actually being done in response to an NCAT order. Now, an NCAT order is not on my radar. We don't see these projects. So one of the things we've got to do is to work out how we actually see these projects going into the future. This is a $3 million rectification on a 10-year-old building. This is 74 apartments, of which 54 were still occupied the day I went in. I picked this site just driving around on a Sunday, just looking at things that I thought we may not be looking at. So this was just a drive-by. I was just poking around looking for stuff. And I found this site, and I couldn't understand what was going on. I couldn't see a DA. As it turned out, it was just a CDC, and it was pretty well off everybody's radar. And we went in. So I interviewed the builder and talked to him about the way the project was conducted. I'm sorry, probably a bit over on time, am I? The main purpose of this site was that this audit was, in fact, that this was a building that was built with precast, and it had a precast roof. So the roof was precast planks. And over that roof was membrane. And it went across and up over the top of the precast on the sides, and there was a capping on the top. And of course you can imagine that it didn't take long for the entire perimeter of the building and the membrane to fail right round the edge of that building. And so those precast planks were being held up by these. There was so little of the one I photographed left that it would have only been a matter of a year or so, and those planks would have been dropping onto people in a bedroom. So I'm glad that they're back fixing it. I'm glad that the owners were able to see a way forward and get it done. But you know, little things like, I said to the guy, you've got 54 residents still living here. You've put carpet down, you've put protection on the carpet, and there's the fire doors and the corridors, and all the fire doors are wedged open by the protection on the carpet, so none of the fire doors are working. So keep safe and operating, not even on the radar. And I said, mate, how many people on the job? He said, we've got 35. I said, I said, have you done ever a check for safe to work with children for your workforce? No, why? I said, well, you know, there's some pretty ugly characters floating around the industry. I wouldn't want to have it on my reputation that, in fact, a little kiddie got harmed by someone of your workforce. Please make sure you've checked that out the next time I come back, because I'm coming back. So I finished my bit and I ran into the safe work officer who was coming back down the hall, and she had almost steam coming out of her ears. I said, what's up? She said, you're not going up there, Commissioner. You're going straight home. You're not allowed to go on the roof. I've condemned the scaffolding. Now, this was a project on nobody's radar. There was about 200 lineal metres of scaffolding around this building, nearly 4 storeys high. The sole plates at the bottom of the scaffolding were improperly installed. The scaffolding was unstable. The scaffolding was 500 millimetres off the building. The gap was illegal. Workers were jumping across the gap to get onto the roof. That was the only access onto the roof. So she closed the project down and sent everybody home. But as she was coming back down to tell me, she heard this noise in one of the rooms, one of the apartments that had been handed back. And it's a worker in there who's cutting up masonry pieces to go back in as they're replacing these. There's some masonry infills in between them. And what's the galah doing? He's in there with a dry saw, no mask, and they could barely see him for the dust from the door of the apartment. So there's some issues there. The project was closed down for 2 weeks. This is perhaps, though, the most egregious of the projects I've seen so far. This is at 93 Auburn Road, Auburn. This will be very public very shortly. This project got a strata plan approved in November last year. It got an interim occupancy certificate in July this year. So bad was this project that the Fire and Rescue rang me and asked me to come and inspect the project, which I did on the 23rd of October this year. Now, this was a project that was approved by an independent planning council process. So the Cumberland Council had objected to this project. They didn't want to approve it, so they lost control of it. And so they never saw any of the drawings again. The developer managed to substantially change the drawings, substantially change the people involved, and has built the most unsatisfactory building that you could possibly imagine. But the fire brigade took me to this building and they said they'd been there 2 weeks beforehand, so it took me 2 weeks to get there and have a look. They had found on their inspection that the fire pumps had no fuel in them. There were 20 faults on the fire indicator panel that had been on fault for over a month, and the only action that had been taken, mute. There are 175 residents in the building of a 240 apartment building, had settled and moved in. It was still a construction zone. But the most significant thing, have a look at some of this. I mean, there is so much water running down the inside of this building that the fire check around the fire dampers, within a matter of a few months, had just simply fallen onto the floor. Meris was the builder. This is the way that pretty well all the penetrations had been filled in. But I'd like you to guess what that is. Is there anybody in the room who'd like to fathom a guess of what that is? Sorry? Spot on. Eh?
He's from the council.
We did the fire inspection and the structural inspection as well before we attended the site.
Yeah. Well, this lift shaft is out of plumb and they couldn't get the lift in it. So they've handed this building, and the certifier has approved this building for occupancy with one lift on 16 floors. When I stuck my head in the shaft, they've chopped up to 2 inches of the shaft away to try and get a vertical shaft. Now, all the reinforcements exposed. I've got no idea at this stage whether an engineer's had a look at it or not. But this is about a 1400 by 1400 cubicle that is extended into the lobby in each lift. So that's one lift, and the other lift sits in behind here. And here's the new lift in a box downstairs, Eastern Elevators, by the way. And this box was supposed to be big enough to allow them to install the lift doors inside this supposed fire-rated extension into the lobby. Well, the brackets on the lift doors were interrupted by this box, so they just bashed holes in them from about that size to that size over the 16 floors of the building. So in fact, we basically had a fire flew through the entire building. I found the installers in this lift on the 9th floor on a swinging stage in the shaft. The shaft wasn't scaffolded. And when they came out, I said, "Who are you?" They said, "We're putting the doors and the rails in." I said, "Fascinating." I said, "Do either of you have a qualification to install a lift?" "No, we're from Chile." I said, "Well, go back to your office now and tell your boss that I stopped your work and sent you home." Now, I had no powers. I was just so white with anger. I just said, "Stop, get off the job now and go and tell your boss to ring me." And they went, but I didn't have any powers. So I had a lesson in my powers from the rest of my staff a few days later, and I said, that's all right, I'll have them all in March, so we'll come back. But have a look at this. There is the air conditioning, or there is a ventilation duct that runs through the fire pump room, and it's about 100 millimetres below the door that the brigade would come in through to come in here. So if you were coming in with your fire hat on, the place is full of smoke, that's 100 mil below the door height. You know what the certified agreed? We'll just put some foam rubber on the duct so it doesn't hurt them. Now, we're dealing with that certifier, but you know what? We wouldn't have found that certifier probably for another 2 years in the way the system goes, and if it wasn't for fire and rescue, I wouldn't have gone to it. So fire and rescue have now got about 11 projects that they want me to come and see. They're saying, Commissioner, this is just the tip of the iceberg, Commissioner. Now, if anyone thinks for a moment that I'm going to be an impotent commissioner, think again. And the other thing that will define the way I behave is that I will be a frontline commissioner. I'm not going to be a desktop commissioner. The team that I have back in my office driving the data and where to go and what to do, they're all very good. I am certain that we'll reorganise the resources we have to be even more impactful. I'm sure we're going to work together a lot more effectively than we've ever done it in the past. So that will allow me to be out at the frontier, because that's where the impact's going to be, rubbing these donkeys' noses in their own excrement and doing it brutally and visibly. There'll be lots of media attached to this, because I think the only way to do this is to shame people as well, and to do it alive and on the spot while it's hot and ready to go. Not 5 or 6 years down the track when everybody's disappeared off the stage, while they're all here. This is just simply not on under my watch. So, thank you, and I'll take some questions.